Welcome to I Am the End of the Words. This episode's book will be Drew Carey's, give you your time to catch your breath, Drew Carey's Dirty Jokes and Beer, Stories of the Unrefined. This book came out in 1997, so very dated, very dated. That's the first thing I want to say about this book. After I tell you that it's a hardback, dust jacket, red book underneath with black spine, if you will. Very dated. Basically, most of it is just your generic comedian written book. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. The only reason I bought this, I think I found it for $1 at Goodwill, and I really like the Drew Carey Show, and this focuses a lot on that. But first things first, dated. I need to tell anybody that if you're gonna pick this up today and read it, very dated when it comes to women, mostly. There's a lot of sexual harassment talk in this because, I mean, I guess 97, that was a big year for sexual harassment. Or Drew just loved doing sexual harassment jokes. Talks a lot about sexual harassment. Talks a lot about how women can get away with it and men can't. Would not fly today. But 97, different time. People thought differently. People didn't want to say what they really thought. Or they did. Who knows? Either way, a lot of the jokes, you can see the funny in them. You can see where the funny would be. But because of the time separation, they don't land. But you can still see that they're funny, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There are some references that I didn't get. Probably things that were very much in the media in 1997. Wasn't watching the news in 1997, so I don't know what was happening. There's also some serious references to some presidents in here that nobody could care less about now. I did learn a lot about Drew Carey with this book, though. I didn't know he was a Marine. I didn't know he was in the Marines. I didn't know that he was floundering in Cleveland until he was 26, if you will. 24, maybe? 23, 24. But other than that, it's kind of just a generic comedian-written book where it tells some stories, tells some things about his life. The things about the Drew Carey Show are phenomenal. They're fantastic. I really did enjoy the Drew Carey Show. There's a chapter in here where he talks about things coming back from their censor, and he actually gives examples of the memos that were sent and what things needed to be replaced with what didn't make it, what he was surprised did make it in the show. There is a gimmick to this. Every single chapter starts with a dirty joke, if you will, and by dirty, it's kind of take it or leave because they're not always dirty. Actually, they're not dirty. Some are not dirty at all. And most of them you've probably heard by now, if you've heard a bad joke. Let me find a short one so I can just read one just as an example. At the beginning of My Short Happy Life, it starts on page 123. By the way, this book is about 240 pages, so not super long. Print's pretty big too, so it kind of flies by. The joke at the beginning of chapter titled My Short Happy Life is: a man is sitting at home when he hears a knock at the door. He opens the door and sees a snail sitting there on the porch. He picks up the snail and throws it as far as he can. 3 years later, there's a knock at the door. The man opens the door. There's just the same snail. The snail says, "The hell was that all about?" Now see what I mean? Usually the joke does somehow tie into what the chapter is. No matter how minimally that could be. There's one where the joke is about a man having sex with a zebra. Who knows? Drew Carey never even kissed a woman until college, which is interesting. I didn't think that happened. I mean, I guess he is older. I guess things were a lot different back then. Who am I to talk? But about things being different back then, I don't know. He talks about dieting. He talks about, money. Talks about basically everything you would expect a comedian book to touch on. But the saving point of this is the last, I'm going to say, 100 pages? The last 100 pages or so. It starts, the comedian written book ends at 142. At page 142, that book that you read is done. And it's almost a whole different book. It's Drew writing fiction almost. He says it's very heavily based on his life, but for the most part, it's fiction. And the stories are not bad. There's an interesting one about a guy who lived with him who was down on his luck. He let him move in with him because a girl wanted him to. The girl ended up banging him. He tried to kill the guy. Um, Eventually, the guy was in rehab and he was invited to a Cleveland Browns game. The Drew was at the same game. The guy tackled the football great Jim Brown, and then Drew had to drive him out of town to Pittsburgh because you'd be a god in Pittsburgh if you tackled a Brown like that, the greatest Brown of all time. Just these embellished stories. There's a story when he was younger, he got in a fight with a couple guys at a diner, which I imagine probably didn't happen, or at least the way he didn't describe it. So they're definitely works of fiction. You can see where they could be touched of in real life, but they're not badly written. They're actually fairly well written, and that was a shocker for me. I don't know why. For some reason, I always just think that I thought this book was going to be awful. To be honest with you, I thought this book was going to be terrible. It sat on my shelf. I've had this book forever. I read Joan Rivers' book before this, and it was good, actually. Joan Rivers' book wasn't bad. But there were other books that I kept seeing this, and I just went to something else. I saw this and went to something else. I finally grabbed it and read it. Not disappointed. Like I said, the last 100 pages or so saved it for me. It made it a worthwhile read. I'll probably never read it again. I don't know if I would have enjoyed it as much if it would have ended at 142. It would have been shorter, but also it would have just been kind of your generic comedian written book. With that fiction at the end, it adds a different touch, it adds a different feeling to the book. It adds something new, if you will. But remember, dated. My rating for the book will be I can't make it too strong because the beginning was not that strong, even though I love the Drew Carey Show. I'd have to give this a 6, probably a 6 out of 10, because I enjoyed it, but didn't really do a lot for me. Also, Drew talks about a lot about himself in a sexual manner in this, and references himself in weird ways. Kind of made me feel uncomfortable. But there's also moments where you see where he talks about being an everyman, yet he's talking about, getting paid money to go to the Super Bowl. Although he's very thankful for it. It's very interesting. The way Drew's take on his life is very interesting, and I respect it. I respect this book. I liked it. 6 out of 10. Thanks for watching. I got nothing else. Nothing.